So when we proclaim the name of Jesus, power's released.
Welcome to New Dawn Community Church, the message of the week with Pastor Randall Cutter.
We are continuing our studies in the book of Luke, and so we last week had an opportunity to look at the story of Zacchaeus. And I shared an alternate perspective of Zacchaeus. You heard me serenade you with the song, Zacchaeus Was a Wee Little Man. You won't hear me singing in front of you too often, but it seemed appropriate at the time. That might have something to do with why we didn't really post the video on that yet this week. I'm not saying, okay, but our editing department is having a hard time trying to make me sound good in that, so well, that's not really true. The story of Zacchaeus, and I gave you that different way of looking at it based on the fact that when Zacchaeus says, I am giving half of all I have to the poor, and if I'm cheating anyone, I'm repaying it fourfold. And I shared that last week, and I didn't mention, but I just wanted to do it today at the start of this message. When I share something that's an alternate viewpoint like that, you can be guaranteed there are reams of written material on that. Scholars are debating, why wouldn't you translate it as it is a present verb instead of a future verb? And a lot of our translations, because the King James Version translated it that way, and if the King James translated it that way, most of our translations will translate it the way the King James Version does, because translations want to sell their versions. And if they get too far away from the King James Version, they don't sell their versions. It's the way it works. I hate to talk about marketing of Bibles, but it is big business. And so they make decisions about how to translate things based upon what the average Christian can handle. And they won't change beloved stories, because those beloved stories, people will say, they handled Zacchaeus different than I remember. And so that's one of the reasons that translations usually are they change very slowly with regard to beloved stories. But as I said last week, in the story of Zacchaeus, the Greek verb is a present verb. A present is simply, I am doing this, or I am habitually doing this. A future, and that's not used in this story, says, I will do this. And Zacchaeus doesn't say, I will do this. He says, I am doing this. And so last week I pointed out the fact that Zacchaeus probably had run into John the Baptist and had been one of those tax collectors who had taken to heart when he said, what must we do? And John says, don't extort people, and don't take more than is rightfully yours. And but anyway, in the scholarship, which means the whole discussion behind the scenes, which goes on in theology, it is a hotly debated topic. The majority of modern-day commentators lean to Zacchaeus saying, I am already doing this. That's the majority of modern-day scholars. However, because of the fact that translations, again, are writing toward the King James Version, you're not going to see it in your Bible translations. So I sometimes forget to tell you that as background so that it gives you more of a comfort level, and so I'm telling you that now. Usually, by the time I get up and propose an alternate interpretation of something that is a beloved story, I have spent hours reading the literature, finding out I have to look at it and go, why did they translate that as a future instead of a present? Because it's a present. And then I get into the arguments on both sides. And obviously, in my opinion, it's obviously weighted to Zacchaeus already being saved. And it's his household that needs salvation, and Jesus is giving him the wonderful promise and touch. Now, that story ends with Jesus saying, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. And then, right at that moment, he tells the story which is in front of us today. And he tells that story because people were getting so excited about what Jesus was doing that he needed to temper their expectation. And that happens to us too. We get expectations of what we think God is going to do in our lives. and we think, or in the world, or in our nation, or in our community, and we think, oh, it's going to happen right now. And if it doesn't, we can get disappointed. Now, we're knocking on a lot of doors, obviously, because I'm involved in a campaign right now. And yesterday, one of our teams was at a door where the man is a long-time voter. He votes all the time because we know how much people vote. It's public record. We don't know who they vote for, obviously, but we know how often they vote. And so we're going to very high turnout voters because it's a special election. And one of the guys, my team got to the door and he said, "I'm not voting anymore." Really angry. Because it doesn't make any difference. Well, what it was is obviously his expectations for change. He was really upset about the tax increases. By the way, that's what you run into a lot. His expectation for change had not been met, and so now he's angry and is not going to be involved in the process anymore. That's what he was telling my team. Whether that's the way it really works out in his life, who knows? But he was saying, my expectations have not been met, and so I'm angry about it. We as Christians cannot afford that. I don't think we as a nation can afford that from voters either, but we as Christians definitely cannot afford to get embittered because we have false expectations, and when things aren't met, we get angry and blame God. Or we get discouraged and depressed and no longer are involved in the process of growing in the kingdom of God. We have to make sure that that doesn't become a part of who we are. Today, that's what the story is that Jesus is telling us about. It's about tempering expectations. So if I've entitled this message, Tempering Kingdom Expectations. Now, by the way, this is obvious when you read the Old Testament and you see the long periods of time that would go by between promise and fulfillment in the lives of the patriarchs. That should teach us all something very important. Between the time that God has promised something to us and the time that it's fulfilled, there may be long gaps of time in there, and those long gaps of time are the ones where we are being remodeled. Our soul, who we are, is being remodeled so that we can handle whatever the promises of God are. And if we understand that, that's going to temper our expectations right up front. Jesus, dealing with the crowds that are around him who are building to messianic fervor, he's only 17 miles away from Jerusalem right now, in Jericho, and where we are in our story. And the fervor is building. Remember, when he gets to Jerusalem, they're going to have what we call the triumphal entry. And everyone's going to give him a king's welcome into the city. That's how much fervor was building around him. And so he took the time, as he's working and walking with Zacchaeus, to teach about what the people of their time could expect. And it's going to help us a lot also as we once again remember what it means to have appropriate kingdom expectation. He kind of pulls back the veil a little bit to the people so that they would tamp down their fervor a little bit and they'd recognize in a very mature fashion, I'm going to keep going forward with the Lord no matter how long it takes. And they weren't going to let their false expectations, and he didn't want that to happen. He did not want their false expectations to set them up for a falling away later on. We are in Luke chapter 19, verses 11 to 27. And remember, this is my translation of Luke 19. It's always good if you have your version of the Bible open in front of you. Jesus had just said, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which is lost. While they were listening to these things, Jesus proceeded to tell them a parable because he was near Jerusalem and they believed that the kingdom of God was going to appear almost immediately. That was the expectation. That's why the triumphal entry happened. He's in this discussion about Zacchaeus. There was false expectations going on. What they literally expected to happen is that Jesus would unveil his messianic glory and he would take over Jerusalem, kick Herod or Pontius Pilate at the time and the Romans out, and he would then lead Israel to victory, restoring the throne of David. That was their understanding at that time. We understand why they had that understanding. We in the Christian church expect a revival at any moment. This is down through our history. That's going to change everything as we go along. And so They had the same thing. They were the Jewish expectation of kingdom. We have Christian expectation. We all point back with fondness to the Welsh revival in the early 1900s, and we point back to that because it changed everything. It changed the entire culture. Unfortunately, it didn't have lasting impact, but it had a lot of impact at the time that it was going on. It's one of those things that Christians talk about a lot. If only we could have another Welsh revival. Well, we want that same, that would be our expectations. God's got to do the same thing. By the way, I do believe we can expect God to move. I do believe we can expect revivals. It's one of the ways that God works. However, I also believe that a major part of the kingdom is us growing in our understanding of who our God is and walking forward no matter if our expectations in this arena are met or not. So, they had false expectations of the events that were about to occur in Jerusalem, and they had that idea of the messianic takeover. And so Jesus does a story, and this would help people a lot, especially after the events of his suffering, death, and resurrection, because they'd remember the story, and then the gospel writers would repeat the story, and they would understand, this is what he was telling us about, that we can't expect everything's going to happen according to our expectation. So very important for us to read it, very important for the people of Jesus' day to hear it. So verses 12 and 13. Therefore, he said, a certain high-ranking man went to a far country to receive a kingdom for himself and then returned to it. He called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas and said to them, tend to my business until I come back. Now, when Jesus told this story, everyone understood immediately the reference. And the reference was to what had happened. There was a historical context. Herod the Great, he was the one who killed the babies in Bethlehem. When he had taken over Jerusalem by force, he went to Rome to make sure that Caesar would ratify that for him. And we had the same thing when he died. Archelaus, his son, immediately took over for his dad, but he could not proclaim himself king. He could only go to the Caesars to get that back. He could not get it. He could not just say, I'm the king. He had to go to Rome. And so when he left for Rome, now this was years before, this is when Jesus was still in Egypt. Archelaus is the one who is now reigning. We know Mary and Joseph came back, according to Luke chapter 2 and Matthew, and that Archelaus was reigning when they came back after the murder of all the kids in Bethlehem, and so now they went and lived up in Nazareth again, because Archelaus had gotten the throne, and he was reigning in the place of his father. But he had to go all the way to Rome. Remember, this was not just a trip down to the corner store. This took a long time. He had to get in a boat, and they had to sail. They sailed close to the shorelines the entire way because it was just too dangerous out in the open sea, especially when you had a royal personage along on your boat. It took forever to get to Rome, to get to have an audience with Caesar, and then to be able to get him to bless you or not. And when Archelaus got to Rome, he did not get a kingship. He got the kingdom, he got the rule, but he only got half of Herod's kingdom, and he was proclaimed an ethnarch, not a king. And that, of course, was a fairly major demotion, but he was still in charge until he had made so many mistakes that Rome recalled him, exiled him to Gaul, and then put governors in place of the king, the Herod line and their tetrarchy. So we have the kingdom was split between two other brothers, and we'll get into that some other time. But the Herod the Great and Archelaus both had made this trip. Anybody that wanted to be a king, really an under-king under the emperor, or any type of ruler of an area or region had to make that trek. And so you had to leave your servants in charge. And in this particular case, we have a high-ranking man who went to a far country to receive a kingdom for himself. Okay? Called 10 servants in. Say, hey, I need you to take care of business while I'm gone. And actually gave them some minor responsibility. That is the whole picture. By the way, it's indicating Jesus is trying to point out there's going to be a delay in the manifestation of the kingdom. That's the point. That's what he's trying to communicate. Guys, just like it was for Archelaus, just like it was for Herod, there's a delay before you see me crowned as king on this earth. Now, since then, it's been, a fairly long time, but he warned of a delay. And then he says, this is what you should be doing during the delay. And he brings in some folks and says to them, you tend to my business. And he gives them each a mina. Now, Matthew tells a story in chapter 25 of Matthew about talents. And talents were worth a lot. I mean, they were 20 years worth of wages or something like that. A mina was only like 3 or 4 months worth of wages for the average working man. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it's significant. If someone gives you a paycheck or a check for what you normally earn in 3 to 4 months, you've got some investments to think about. You got, what am I going to do with that? And that's exactly what these guys had to think about. What am I going to do with that? He says, tend to my business. Some of your translations will say, work in my business, or take care of my business. Some of them will say invest in my, whatever. It all has the same idea. Here's the mina. You use it to advance my business interests. That's the concept behind it, of course. And so that's the picture. He says, hey, here's this king, and or high-ranking individual, not a king, but a high-ranking individual who now is in line to receive a kingdom, and so he heads off, and they all were thinking, oh yeah, that's what happened with Herod, that's what happened with Archelaus. They understood exactly the context of what was going on. Then, verses 14 and 15, but his citizens hated him and sent representatives behind him to state, we do not want this man to be king over us. When he received his kingdom, he returned and summoned the slaves to whom he had given the silver so that he might know what profit they had made. So we got the story. By the way, that did happen with Archelaus. Archelaus had killed a bunch of people. He had killed about 3,000 people and killed 2 teachers and a bunch of their students. I think about 40 people. He actually burned them all to death. Wasn't a nice man. And the Jewish people were getting pretty upset. He had put a wooden eagle up over the temple, and the 2 teachers and their students had chopped it down. And so in response, I suspect he used the wood of the eagle plus a bunch of other wood and said, here, and burned them. And very unpopular. He ended up having to deal with an uprising where about 3,000 people were killed. And so now he has to go to Rome to get the kingdom. And the Jewish leaders sent an embassy after him to testify before Caesar that we do not want this man to be our king. So again, Jesus is he's telling a story that everyone understood. Oh yeah, this is really what happens. There are those that are not enamored by this. Now, some of your translations say some of his citizens hated him, and the word "some" isn't in there. It's implied because not every single citizen hated him, but the majority did. Trust me in that. And after he did all that nasty stuff, you bet he was not a popular figure. So the historical reference is Archelaus again. And Archelaus did not get the kingship. He became an ethnarch or a ruler, but he did not get the kingship, so that when he came back. But they sent that embassy after him. So Jesus is just using historical context. They understand it. He comes back, and he has to deal with the situation that he left behind. He does come back, and he's over that area of the kingdom. It's just that he's not a king. He is in charge, though. Just like Pontius Pilate was the governor, he was in charge. And so he comes back, and he wants to find out what's going on. He's given 10 of his servants 3 to 4 months of wages each. And, in the Greek language, it's called silver here. It's not talking about an amount. It's talking what it was that he actually paid them. It was silver worth a mina. And so he calls them in, and he requires of them to let them know about the profit. You don't have someone tend to your business if you're not interested in profit. You all know that, right? You don't give someone charge of your business so that you can have write-offs, because you're not going to be open very much longer. You need to be able to see profit. And so he calls them in to get a report on their profits, because that's what he's looking for, is profits. That was his goal. He's testing his 10 servants is what he is. He's finding out which ones are the best at doing this, because he's obviously looking forward, which ones do I put in charge where? See, that's how it's done. You test your people to find out where they have the grace to serve. And when you find out where they have the grace to serve, you're able to put them in it. And the way that you find out where they have the grace to serve is you just see how they handle little things. Because whoever's faithful with little will also be faithful with much. And this I learned from Lance Wallnau, just a different way of putting it. How you do anything is how you do everything. Whether it's on a small scale or a big scale, how you do anything is how you do everything. So, watch your integrity in those areas. If you have a lack of integrity in small things, you'll have a lack of integrity in big things. And so you have to make sure that you understand that about yourself, because you can start to change the little things and become a person of greater integrity over them, because that will also automatically transfer to the larger things. That's how it works. Next verses. The first one of those servants came and said, "Lord, your mina has made 10 more minas." Then the king said to him, that should say ruler, because he wasn't really king. The ruler said to him, "Well done, my good servant, because you have been faithful in the smallest of things, you shall have authority over 10 cities. The second came and said, "Your mina, my lord, has made 5 minas." Again, the king also said to him, "You are to have authority over 5 cities." So, this is the examples of the profit margins. We don't get all 10 servants coming back in. We just get we're getting 3 of them coming back, and we have an example of the type of things that they did. The first thing we're told is one gained 10 and one gave 5 minas. That's a good return on your investment. And so the king was very happy, or the ruler was very happy with that, the ethnarch. And Jesus, as he's talking about this, is demonstrating to us how the kingdom works. God is working in us, in the kingdom, looking for a return on his investment. That's Matthew 25. He gives us talents. Now, the word, the monetary sum of talent in the Greek language, talentos, has become in our language our talents or our abilities. It's not really a great translation or a great transfer of concept, because in that parable it says he gives us the talents, according to our gifts and abilities. It's each according to his ability. And so it wouldn't make sense that he would give us our abilities according to our abilities. But what makes sense is he gives us our opportunities according to our abilities. Right? He gives us our opportunities. By the way, in 1 Corinthians, it says very clearly that the Father is the one, or the Holy Spirit is the one who gives us our gifts, and Jesus is the one who gives us our ministry opportunities. He's the one that provides us with the service opportunities in the kingdom. So he looks at the gifts the Holy Spirit has given us, and he says, "I'm going to give you these opportunities." If he's given you a teaching gift, you should realize you're going to run into opportunities to teach. And it may start in Sunday school, but if your gift in the church is working this way, you end up seeing people recognizing the gift, and you're faithful with the little things. And Sunday school is not a little thing, but it certainly isn't the same as standing up in front of thousands of people speaking. Sunday school is extremely important. That's why you're being entrusted to find out those little lives need to hear. But as you're entrusted with what in the world feels like a little thing, you end up getting more and more authority because of the things that you are able to do. The same thing happens when God has entrusted you with an ability, if it's not even in the church, it's out of the church. And what happens is, as you are faithful with that, you're going to get more and more authority, more and more responsibility, more and more opportunity to exercise the particular gifts that you have. That's the way it works in the kingdom. If we're faithful with the little, God will continue to make sure that we have opportunity to exercise it at a much higher level. These guys had their prophets come in. It was really a test to find out whether the ruler would give them true authority. And so the guy that had a 10 mina prophet got 10 cities. That's significant. Just ruling one city on behalf of the guy who is in charge of the whole area, the territory, ruling one city on his behalf makes you a major mover and shaker in the kingdom. However, moving 10 cities means that you have a tremendous amount of authority. He believes that you can handle the management of 10 cities. And It was no different back then than it is now. There was a lot to take care of and manage with any city. In the cities back then, you had the number one thing you were doing for the ruler was making sure that all the taxes were collected. The second thing was making sure that all of the health and safety issues were met, making sure that there was security, making sure that the city wasn't being plundered by thieves and robbers or outside threats. The other thing was, just like it is today, sewer and water. Make sure that things are taken care of. The basics. The roads needed not to have potholes that would swallow your chariot. Okay? That's the way it worked. And so they had a lot of work to do to be able to make sure those cities were appropriate in their area. So one guy got 10 cities, one guy got 5 cities. And so we're learning a principle is that the smaller things are used to assess our responsibility. If we are responsible with the smaller things, we'll be responsible with the larger things. If you don't believe God is meeting you at the level of your ability to release you into the things, ask yourself, have you been responsible with the smaller things in your life? Because sometimes people say, this is below my dignity. There is nothing below your dignity. Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. And you can believe their feet were awful. Because when you walked through the streets of Jerusalem, you picked up manure and all sorts of awful stuff, human and animal. And so when Jesus washed their feet, he was washing off excrement and all sorts of nasty stuff. It wasn't beneath his dignity to serve his disciples in that way. And when we believe something is beneath our dignity, our experience, who we are, or what we imagine ourselves to be, we're just demonstrating that we have more pride than we really should have. Now, by the way, you shouldn't have any. You can have a sense of self-satisfaction over a job well done, of course. You can thank God for the grace to be able to accomplish the job. But to puff yourself up and think that you are something because you are able to accomplish these things, don't forget where the grace comes from. Remember the story which Jesus told? We went through it not too long ago. He says, when you come in from the fields after serving God, and you come in from the fields, don't expect the master to serve you. Isn't he going to say instead, prepare my meal too, and after you're done serving me, you can sit down, because all you are servants. You've done your job. And that's what Jesus is pointing out here. But what he's doing instead of just saying you've done your job, he's saying if you do your job well, you're going to get more work to do. Isn't that great? But it's going to come with more authority. You're going to have more authority in the kingdom of God. With more authority comes more responsibility, more opportunities to serve, more opportunities to the gifts that God has given you. And so he's telling about this process. They're thinking, this whole thing is going to happen right now. And he's saying, no. There's going to be a long gap. And what you need to do is acquit yourselves in the business of the kingdom at a very high level, demonstrating that you are worthy of the honor that I want to bestow on you in the future. That's in your life, and of course when he comes again. Because when he comes again, we're not just all being transported into the heavenly realms. He's creating a new heaven and a new earth, and there's going to be responsible positions in the new heaven and the new earth that he needs to populate with people who demonstrated that they were responsible. He says to the disciples, we're going to get to it. He says, you're going to be judging the 12 tribes of Israel. You're going to be on thrones when I return. That means they had responsibilities. There's no such thing as a throne that doesn't come with a responsibility to exercise work and dying to self and serving people. Just the way it works. So we are here always being tested if we will deal with the small things so that we can get greater authority. And of course, the real thing is what's going to happen when we step into the time when Jesus comes again. Because anything we do here is just a minor. The real value is when we are positioned in the new heaven and the new earth. He's communicating all this so his people do not have false expectation of how the kingdom works, about how quickly it was going to manifest. He's giving them an understanding so that they will acquit themselves well in his absence. In Luke 16, we saw this couple of chapters ago. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And that's the bottom line. The guy that had the 5 and the 10. Now, the other guys, there may have been a person that only gained 1. We know that from Matthew 25, but it was still a gain. Obviously, if you're in business, there's market vagaries. It's not the amount so much as what you are able to accomplish with it. And the Lord is teaching us about the fact that we just need to be faithful and don't be dishonest with what God has given you. Now we got the negative example, the other guy. And this is the person who operates more in fear and perhaps laziness than an understanding of what the kingdom is all about. Verses 20 and 21. Then another came and said, "My Lord, see, here is your mina, which I stored away in a cloth napkin. For I was afraid of you, for you are a harsh man who takes what you did not give and harvests where you did not plant." Almost the same accusation in Matthew, because that's a very common accusation which people have against God. I'm afraid of you. Well, why are you afraid? Because you have a misunderstanding of who God is, honestly. You have a misunderstanding about who Jesus is. You aren't working hard enough in your studies of who he is, either through the word or encounter with him, so that you know that he is not what is being portrayed here. So we've got this guy burying that which was entrusted to him. They'd often put silver in some kind of cloth before they literally buried it in the ground. You go out under darkness and you dig a hole somewhere and you put your money in underneath it. That's what, might be one way that you took care of it. It doesn't make any money there, but it's certainly safe, is it not? You're not going to lose it. Inflation might nibble away at it, whatever, but you're not going to lose it. So he said, "My Lord, I've got the mina, but I was afraid." And so because of that, I know you're a harsh man. It's an exacting. The idea behind the Greek word is exacting or severe, kind of like someone who watches every penny and takes advantage of every opportunity. And it comes out in harshness. But you take what you did not give and you harvest where you did not plant. That's his understanding of who his master is. And obviously he's saying that it's, he's saying, I was afraid. It's fear motivation. By the way, fear is pretty much the opposite of faith. People will say, well, fear is the opposite of love. It doesn't matter. It's not faith. It's pretty diametrically opposed to faith. And so, fear motivation, tied together, it just reveals his lack of understanding, and it results in the fact that he was afraid to take any risks on behalf of his master. By the way, the fact that he gave each of them a mina to work with demonstrates that this guy doesn't understand his master, right? The master gave him the seed money to invest. He was sowing into his servants so he could reap a harvest from those that he had sowed into. And it's the same way the Lord works in our lives. He puts stuff into us, and then he looks at us and he expects a return in the kingdom. Now remember, we're not talking about salvation. We are saved by grace through faith, totally apart from our works. It's what Jesus has done on the cross, and he has called us to be his disciples. But God has not called us. We're supposed to live a life worthy of the calling that we have. And sometimes we think, well, now I'm saved, I can live like my own selfish pig. That's a book, by the way, right? You did know that? You can buy, there's a Christian book out there. It's How to Live Like Your Own Selfish Pig. Don't give it to anyone as a Christmas gift. It may not be received in the right way for some odd reason. It's not a very big book, so if they did hit you with it, it's not going to kill you. That'd be the benefit. But it could sting, so we're not here to be our own selfish pig. We're here because we now have an opportunity to glorify our God in heaven. We want men to see our good deeds and glorify our Father in heaven. We want to let our light shine, and we want our salt to permeate and flavor the world in which we live. But if we live like our own selfish pig, none of that stuff is going to happen. And if that's how we live, then eventually we're salt that has lost its saltiness, and the only thing that we're valuable for is to be thrown out on the road to fill the potholes. That's what they would use it for, because they had really they had a lot of minerals in their salt. And if it rained on the salt, if it got wet, all of the sodium chloride would get washed out, and all they'd have left is this other stuff, and it was awful, and so they'd take it and they'd fill potholes. That's what these guys that had cities in charge, they'd say, get the worthless salt and throw it in the potholes. And then everyone would trample it underfoot because it was filling the potholes, making the roads better. And that's the picture Jesus says. If you're not willing to go out and flavor your culture, what's going to happen is eventually your culture is going to trample all over you. Whenever you complain that Christians are no longer respected in this culture, you are condemning the Christian church's ability to salt the culture. You can whine all you want, but you are pointing out that the Christian church has failed in one of its primary missions, to let its light shine. Oh, but that devil. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions. That's what Jesus said. You don't blame the devil. You blame our inability to connect with God at the level of faith and belief so that we're able to stand in the light and authority that we have. And most often, we don't do it because we simply don't have enough courage. And the reason we don't have enough courage is we're afraid of failure, and we can even blame the one who has given us the calling to say, well, you know how God is, I'll do it, it won't work, and then I'll, blah, blah, blah. It's just a total misunderstanding of the calling that we have. This guy was afraid to risk for his misunderstanding of how the kingdom works. And we can't be afraid to risk. We have to be able to step out in faith and accomplish the things that God has called us to do. And one of the bottom line things we need to do is love our neighbor as ourselves every chance we can get. But that's risky because sometimes our neighbors reject us. But if we keep loving them in spite of their rejection, eventually their rejection might not quite have the bite in it, right? And they start to think, I was at the door the other day of a person's house, different faith, obviously a different faith. We were just sharing who I was. And one of the little kids, I'm talking to the mother, one of the little kids says, we drove by one of your signs the other day. And my daddy said he's voting for you because you're a good man.
Yes.
That's amazing, isn't it? See, that's what we do. We keep loving people because if you keep loving people, even if they're not of the same faith group, they recognize the light that you have on the inside. I would wish that every Christian had that being said about them. That they're good men and good women. That the people who live around us who aren't Christians say, I don't agree with that crazy faith they got. They believe this dead guy rose from the dead. Think about it, I don't agree with that faith that they got, but boy, they live right. I remember driving through Salt Lake City. I think I was about 12 years old with my parents. And as we were going down the road, someone beeped the horn, and there was two different cars, and I don't remember which car it was, but rolled down the window, and they said, hey, there's a problem with blah, blah, blah. Maybe it was gas cap or something like that. And I remember what the person who was driving the car said. He said, whenever you come here, it was Salt Lake City, whenever you come here, that you find out that people really want to help you. Now, the person would not agree with their faith, but he said, they'll help you. That's the light that we need to be shining, isn't it? So that people see that and they say, my goodness. And if we're loving our neighbor as ourselves, that's just going to happen. If we're not afraid and we're able to risk, eventually the people, unless they are absolutely against God and against anyone who represents God, are going to see something different about you. By the way, that's not the majority of our culture. The people that are absolutely against God are a real minority in our culture. And so there's hearts that are wide open to see the light that is inside of you. So, this guy makes an accusation. It's a wrong accusation, and the master points out that it's the wrong accusation. Verses 22 to 24. The king said to him, I will judge you by what has come from your own mouth, you worthless servant. Okay, I just want to stop there a minute. Well done, good and faithful servant, worthless servant. Which one do you want to be greeted by? The king said to him, verses 22 to 24, I will judge you by what has come from your own mouth, you worthless servant. You knew that I am a harsh man, taking what I did not give and harvesting where I did not plant. Then why didn't you give my silver to the money changers? Then when I came, I could have collected it with interest. He said to those who were standing near him, take the mina from him and give it to the one who has the 10 minas. So, he doesn't even bother to refute the rather shallow argument. He said, well, if that's what you think of me, then you should have put money on deposit with the guys who run the tables. That's literally what the Greek says. The tables were not the gaming tables like they would be in our culture. They were the money-changing tables, and many of your translations say the banks as a result. But they didn't have a banking system like we have. It was the money changers, and they would use and make their money and all that stuff. So it was the guys who are in charge of changing money and of lending things out or doing whatever. They had tables they would set up, and they were the ones who would actually earn you some money. A lot of times it would be low risk. You'd go to a table that was low risk. You wouldn't go to the more high-risk tables because, if you had someone else's money, you usually would make sure you didn't do the high-risk stuff. You'd keep lower. And so he's just saying, why didn't you go there? And at least you got back some interest, some response to my money. Then I could have collected it with interest. And he said, take it away. So he's judged by his own words. His words were wrong. They were a misunderstanding. But to bury your abilities, to not respond to the gifts and opportunities that God gives to you is wrong. And by the way, in our picture, it would be, here God gives you gifts, he gives you opportunity, and you choose not to use it. If you just ignore it, you're burying it in a handkerchief. But if you say to someone with a gift and calling that can cover it, hey, will you cover that for me? That's getting it back with interest. You understand? He didn't even judge the guy for not doing it. He said, you didn't even give it to someone who would do it. That's how little you cared about my kingdom purposes. That's really the message. Because he said, you didn't not only not do it, you could have given it to those who would have done it. And you chose not to. That's huge. Because sometimes when the Lord gives us an opportunity, we honestly just say to ourselves, I don't have time. I can't do this sort of thing. But don't just ignore it. You know people. If you have been given an opportunity, it's obvious you'll know people who are able to take advantage of it and actually do what is necessary to make sure that this kingdom investment is taken care of. So he's told he's a worthless servant. Again, you don't want to hear this when you're standing in front of because this is a picture of the end of the age when Jesus is going to have those accounts. And again, we're saved by grace through faith, but now we've been given a calling, and that's what the kingdom's all about. Are we going to step into the calling? Are we going to accomplish what we've been called to do? Are we going to be profitable servants in the kingdom, or are we going to be worthless, just being our own selfish pigs? Another way of looking at this is in 1 Corinthians 3, where it says, if you build with hay and stubble and other consumables, you yourself will be saved, but you'll be saved as through the fire. Which means there will be nothing that you have accomplished of lasting benefit that's going to be able to be translated into the heavenly realms, so that you can have authority in the new heaven and the new earth. So he says, hey, you're worthless. Didn't live by his, he didn't even live by his own beliefs because he would have put it on deposit. If he would have been living by his beliefs, he'd have said, oh no, I've got the money. I've got to do something with it. I got to put it on deposit because otherwise this guy's going to, he just lived in fear. He didn't even live by what he was saying. And so what did the master do? He redirected the wealth. He said, give it to the guy that's already made 10 minas. The guy obviously had 11. He started with 1. He made 10, so he has 11. Now he's going to have 12. He says, give it to him. He knows how to use it. Now that's a kingdom mindset. Hey, I've got a mina. I'm going to give it to the guy that knows best how to use it to make me the most money. Our mindset is, what did the guys say next? They said to him, and by the way, these were his attendants, obviously, in court. They said to him, Lord, he already has 10. I tell you that anyone who has more will be given, but from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. But these enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them in front of me. That's, by the way, what Archelaus did. So, here's the kingdom view versus the worldly view. God's looking for people that are going to give him the best return. You know, the world's view, hey, you've already given that guy enough authority. Why would you give him more? That woman, that man in the kingdom of God. Why would you give that person more? And the Lord's saying, I'll give him more because he's trustworthy with more. He can handle it or she can handle it. It's something I can entrust to them because it'll multiply. Here's a simple example. We're talking about people here for the most part. We're talking about opportunities to impact people. Lord gives you an opportunity. Someone says to you, what must I do to be saved? You're just stumbling along. You're sitting in a pub in Wales, trying to ignore the people around you. Some guy asks you about a book you're reading, and you're really annoyed because you just want to read the book, and you want to have a rack of lamb. And the person keeps interrupting. And finally, you're forced to explain the gospel. You know, it's because the person basically says, what must I do to be saved? And the person sitting, I'm not going to say I am done this because, and you finally realize, oh, this is an opportunity because you're slow. Because you're interested in reading a book and having a rack of lamb. And you just think this is a businessman who's just down from a city to the north, who's trying to stop you from reading your book and having a nice rack of lamb. And eventually in your responses, he finds out who you are and what you're doing, and he says, what must I do to be saved? And at that point in time, you look around the room and there's no one else around to give this guy to. So instead of just burying the talent, you turn around and you say, well, let me tell you about the gospel. And you lead the guy into the kingdom. Now, for me, it ended there because I gave him my contact info and never heard anything from him. But just imagine if you lived there and you did that. And you had the contact information, you lived in the same region as he did. He goes home to his family, he says, my life has been changed. I want that person to come and share with my family. There was one opportunity God gave, and now there's 5 because there's 5 family members. After the 5 family members are saved, some of them have wives and children. Now it multiplies. There's more opportunities based upon that. You eventually look like Billy Graham in stadiums, and it all started because you let the rack of lamb go cold. You decided not to be your own selfish pig for a minute and to really let God, when finally you go, well, this is the Lord, obviously. I should probably fine-tune my ability to sense when God is moving. But think about how those opportunities multiplied. Now, by the way, in that particular instance, I did not see any further fruit from that I knew of, but you don't think God has given me other opportunities based upon the faithfulness which I showed in that particular instance? See, we know that happens. Take it from that one who's not using it and give it to the other who's already faithfully using it. That's how it works in the kingdom of God. This is the kingdom view versus the worldly view. The guy that's not using it, take it away from him and give it to someone who's actually going to put it into use. I think one of my biggest concerns about what I'm going to find out when I step into the Lord's presence one day is how many times I buried the talent. I buried the opportunity without even knowing it, without even thinking about it. And that would be something that would horrify me. Now, fortunately for me, I also take a lot of advantage of what God gives to me, and as a result, I believe that I'm walking as one of those servants that's got a little bit more going on than the guy who buried the talent. But I'm not going to ever say I've never buried a talent, I've never buried an opportunity, because I think that's just endemic to being a human being, and we got to ask God that we get better and better at not burying the opportunity. So this is the kingdom view versus the worldly view. They're like, wait a minute, he's already got 10 he's made. Why would you want to give him more? And kingdom authority is based on our faithful use. on multiplying what God has given to us. Now, just in case you don't get the message that this is talking about those who are in the kingdom of God, there's this contrast. Jesus brings everyone that's around him right back to Archelaus, because they know these are bloodthirsty people. The Herods were bloodthirsty people. And Archelaus, of course, would take revenge on those who sent the delegation to try to talk Caesar from putting him into the king. And so Jesus just brings that up to point out, by the way, there are people that are not subjects of the kingdom, and they're eventually going to be standing before the Lord on Judgment Day, and it's not going to be a whole lot of fun. Now, it's not going to be the same as when Archelaus did it, but this was a story taken from the context of what he was living. But he reminds us right away, there are those who are subjects of the kingdom. That's who he's talking about. And then there are those who are not subjects of the kingdom. And they're the ones that when they face the Lord on Judgment, they won't even be a part of this discussion. He's talking about us. He's talking about the fact that we can be a worthless servant when we are a part of God's family. And so he wanted the people of the time to understand that they needed to look at things far differently than they were looking at them. We are not in this world to serve ourselves. We're not like those who lord it over others like the Gentiles do. That's what Jesus said to the Jewish people who were around him who understood the kingdom of God in his culture. We are those who follow the path that God has demonstrated to us through Jesus. We take up our cross daily and we follow Jesus and we serve others. And the Lord says, when you do that, I'm going to multiply the opportunities. I know I hear from some of you say, I don't know why I'm the person that people will always share their burdens with. Because you died to yourself and you took the opportunity to simply listen to someone who was hurting, and the Lord says, I can trust that person to listen to hurting people without rejecting them. It's not an accident. This is a kingdom view. We use what we know. And by the way, when you're listening to someone who's hurting, you usually don't know. The only thing you know to do is listen. That's perfect. You may not have any idea how to respond to it. You've already responded to it. You've listened. You've prayed. You've done whatever you can. And it releases life to people. So tempering kingdom expectation, Jesus had to do that back then. He still has to do it today. Because when the Lord speaks to us about what he's doing, we want to have it tomorrow. We have instant gratification mentality. And the Lord's more nuanced than that. He wants us to grow in our ability to use the things that he has given to us in an appropriate way. The length of time is a blessing to us because it gives us more opportunity to do it right. And to be able to learn. It's his mercy to us that gives us more time. And that's a great thing. So, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity today to learn more about what our kingdom expectation should be. I ask that as we serve in your kingdom, that you would help us be fruitful servants and not worthless servants. I'm sure that each and every person here has had times they've buried the things that you have given them simply because we've missed the opportunities. We've been just dense. But we are asking for a sensitivity, Lord, and more opportunities that we will not miss. We ask that your Spirit would nudge us whenever we have an opportunity so that it becomes obvious to us, so that we are able to move forward, doing the things you have called us to do, and multiplying our authority here on earth and also in your heavenly kingdom. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.